Right.
How did you lose it?
In the train, I only use my handbag where my laptop is in, and I just went out and traveled a lot, and then, oh, where's my case?
Okay. Let's get going then. Good afternoon, everybody. Well done for, I was just saying to the colleagues, this is a tough slot after lunch on a sunny day on a Saturday in Perugia. But well done for coming along. I'll do the Trump inauguration joke. This is the biggest crowd for a panel. My name's Charlie Beckett. I'm a professor at the London School of Economics, and very pleased to be here. My career, which started literally a century ago, or last century, actually started on local newspapers, on the South London Press. So I have a great respect for local journalism, and I think we're all very conscious in many ways that local journalism is both under threat in many countries, mainly because of business reasons, but also I think we're all becoming more aware of how vital it is that if people are going to be properly informed about their life, then they need to have more than just national or international news. They need to know what's going on in their communities. And I also think it's a wonderful way to get more diverse people into journalism. If we have a thriving local press or local news media. I think the focus has been, as I said, on the sort of financial aspect, that, you know, how can we save local news, how can we subsidize it? But I think this session is refreshing and remarkable because it's talking about how can we actually make local journalism better, both in terms of what it's doing, but also in terms of innovation. That it's not just a question of propping up what's there, but thinking about new things that we can do, if you like, at a local or grassroots community type level, and how we can do it in different ways. You know, how can we bring expertise to those newsrooms? How can those newsrooms work collaboratively together or with other people? So we're going to get two presentations. I think Megan from Bureau Local is going to go first, and then David from Correctiv is going to present his work. And I think, well, we can, if you've got questions individually or collectively, let's do those perhaps at the end. We'll have the presentations first. So, Megan, if you'd like to kick us off, that'd be great.
Thank you. So the Bureau Local was launched 2 years ago, which feels like a lifetime, but it was launched 2 years ago. We've just celebrated our 2-year anniversary. And we're so honored to be here to talk about it because it's one of the most exciting things I've personally done in my career. And we're so proud of what we've been doing. And what we're excited to do today to talk about with Correctiv is the model has been replicated in Germany, and now we have this fantastic relationship between the Bureau of Investigative Journalism in the UK and Correctiv in Germany, in which we're trying to build on this model. And the model is of a collaborative reporting network. Several years ago, my boss, Rachel Oldroyd, at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism in the UK, which is a nonprofit working on underreported issues that need investigating, was looking for the next frontier of what was not being reported, what was vital that needed to be investigated, and realized it was on kind of our own doorstep. Realizing that in the UK, as most of us will all know around the world, local journalism has been under threat. As business models have changed and as journalism has faced a lot of challenges, local news has been hit particularly hard. And we were sort of watching the news unfold, and she was seeing local newsrooms being shut down and local reporters losing their jobs, but most importantly, this fear of this disconnect and this total uprooting around the country. There is still some thriving and incredible local reporters around the UK, but it's definitely a fight. At the same time, there was this sort of rise of information, as we all know, the rise of data journalism, the rise of digitized information. So how could we combine those things? And very much inspired by the Panama Papers project at the ICIJ, Rachel Oldroyd thought, how can we potentially use the power of collaboration and the power of data to support an infrastructure nationwide. So the idea was really building a collaborative network inspired by what they saw globally, but in one country. So could you get reporters from around the UK to all collaborate to better their own lives, to better their own communities? And that was the challenge. And I was hired. I used to be the data editor for the Times and Sunday Times in London. And my job in that role was to reimagine what journalism and data journalism could look like, how we can build, bringing innovation in deeply into the newsroom to find stories in new ways. So that was the birth and the idea of Bureau Local 2 years ago, and it's had a huge transformation since then. So my plan for the sort of next 20 minutes is basically to kind of take you on that journey of what we've learned for the past 2 years. It has been an incredible project that has gone from that basic idea of a reporters network, and what we now are is a collaborative community of both citizens and journalists fighting to tell important stories. So to give you this sort of overview, 2 years on, we have 1,000 members, 1,000 people who believe that together in the UK we can make a difference by coming together, and that they believe that they'll want to work and put whatever skills or knowledge they can to help hold power to account in the UK. We've helped support 350 local investigations off the back of this. So with every story we do, we are helping reverberate stories around, and I'll tell a bit more about that in a minute. And here are just some of the local titles that we've been supporting. But the most exciting thing is, and as I mentioned, is that the Bureau Local has evolved rapidly, mainly because the industry is changing so quickly, and the more you dig down into local communities, you'll see the change just transform. And we allowed the change in the UK to transform the project. And as a result, we opened ourselves up not just to reporters. And we work with data scientists, we work with lawyers, we work with teachers, we work with all kinds of different expertise in order to better our investigations. And these are just some of the sectors that came out of it. So to give a kind of a quick overview, I just wanted to explain a bit about what we learned. The one thing that we knew coming in, but we've seen it over the past 2 years, is that the traditional model is collapsing. And we've seen this both with, again, the shutdown of news or the conglomerate sort of regional press being formed. As local models are not being able to be supported, they're coming into the regions. Digitized information is changing the way that reporters are writing on topics. So this leads to the fact that there is so much data, so much information out there. I think those of us who worked in national newsrooms know this was a challenge. They were hiring, data experts into the newsroom, but this obviously was not necessarily happening around the country. And it's just a wealth of information. How can you hold all of this to account when, as we speak on our computers and our phones, there's more data being processed this moment than a human can possibly imagine. So how do we as journalists both fight the kind of rise of information and how we hold that to account? And so in the process of both of those things, how the commercial model has changed and how data and information is changing, it has changed our relationship with communities. And we've seen that very clearly over the past 2 years. What we've sort of seen is that separation between local people and local stories, and local people and how they're being portrayed in the news, how they participate in the news, and where they see themselves in that. So when the Bureau Local was launched, it was launched by a couple of reporters like myself who come from different backgrounds. We have an ex-local reporter, a freelance national investigative reporter, and a data journalist reporting. And we sort of came together, and the idea was definitely not to sort of come in and let's help or save other people's journalism. The idea is that this is our industry. And we saw it as our responsibility as journalists that exist in this space to stand and fight with it. So we've always kind of talked about it as sort of standing in the trenches. If there is a lack of information or local people being inhibited to get news or information about their area anywhere, it is a threat to all of us everywhere. And so the idea was, how can we bring our expertise to support our colleagues around the country? And we saw it also as our responsibility to find solutions for it. But we very much learned how that might change. So when we set up, this was the question I mentioned at the beginning. The question was, can reporters work together? Can reporters come together? And very much, like I said, we kind of came in with this traditional idea of the Panama Papers concept of, if we get reporters from different regions, everyone works together, we tell important national stories while also supporting important local stories. And we thought this is how it would work. 2 years on, we've sort of scrapped a very important part of that, and the question has now changed: how can people work together? This is a huge part of the transformation of the project, which is to recognize that, one, journalism itself is changing. As we've been sitting for 2 years, we have watched the industry collapse. We've watched local reporters not be given the time or the means to investigate, but we've seen dedicated people set up their own blogs fighting to investigate their communities. But also there's this rise of what we called citizens trying to commit acts of journalism. So this is not talking about empowering loads of citizen journalists to be trained, but for people to have a really important part in how they contribute to it. So someone might be able to say, I can show you, reporter, the pamphlets that are coming through my door. How can that help you hold power to account? A lawyer can kind of come forward and provide legal frameworks or understanding for how that is. People are recognizing that our skill sets and our knowledge exists outside the newsroom. And this has been a really huge part. When we set out, we knew that we needed reporters, but we also knew we needed technologists. And I think the moment that we opened that door and we allowed data scientists to work with reporters, we said it really opened the door for anyone to come forward. So we slightly changed our stance of when we came in, which is we knew this was our industry to protect, this was ours to fight for, but the most important thing we've learned is that we cannot do it alone and we shouldn't be doing it alone. The idea of collaboration is built so deeply now into the Bureau Local. It's not simply about how reporters can collaborate. The idea is now truly embedded into how can we recognize our own strengths and weaknesses and where there is information. I think the project has more become less about how journalism is fixing itself, but recognizing where we sit in an ecosystem of information. That journalists are simply one piece of that. And if we're truly going to fight for accountability, we have to recognize where that sits and recognize that we're not alone in that. So with that in mind, I'm going to give you some more practical examples of what that actually looks like, because I think that will hopefully help explain the point a bit better. So one of the big things that we set out to do when we knew that data scientists and we knew that data needed to be a big part of how we could tackle evidence at scale, how we could help provide evidence at scale. We went in at the beginning thinking we're going to bring machine learning and AI and really exciting tech to that space, but we learned very quickly by listening and traveling the country and talking to people that people just needed information. People just needed the basic information about politicians in their area or about cuts to services or whatever it was. They just needed the information. They just said, you can make it spin, you can make it look beautiful, I don't care, I just need information. So very quickly, our motto became, let's make the available accessible. Coming from a data journalism background, I was used to sort of processing big amounts of data and bringing that to the public. But I very quickly realized it was a huge privilege to sit in London and be running a data journalism team. But that was not truly accessible to people across the country. So how can we actually make information truly accessible to people? And that's on both ends of the spectrum. So that could be, a big, massive SQL database that, unless you know how to write code, there's no way that you can access that. It's been an incredible feat that the open data community has pushed for more open and robust data sets. But I think what we've forgotten along that is that everyday people can't access an API or write queries to understand a SQL database. So an important part is actually, it's great that that data is being open, but it's our jobs as journalists to make sure it's actually accessible and understandable to people. So half of our job is actually looking at really beautiful, open, great data, but just making it understandable. And the other half is still the fight for transparency, which is, of course, counselors still are publishing budgets and all kinds of really important information in PDFs. And often that's inaccessible to local people as well, because they don't have the time to kind of compile PDFs over years, transfer that into spreadsheets so they can actually look at where cuts are happening. So what we've done is to try to fight both of those arenas, again, with the idea of the average citizen is at the heart of what we're trying to do there. So one example of this is actually over the past month, we've revealed that we had been done a big investigation into how austerity was affecting communities in the UK. And people knew that libraries were being sold off, they knew that their parks were shutting down, and individually local reporters might have understood that there was something severe happening in their community. But what the Bureau Local does is it takes the data and it fights to get that data across the nation and allow to support giving people that local information, but to see the bigger picture. So the series was called sort of Sold From Under You, and we revealed for the first time after compiling freedom of information requests, converting loads of open data into proper data sets. We found there are 12,000 spaces that had been sold off over the past couple years. We released this sort of open search tool that people can kind of search to find out what was being sold off in their area. And here's one example in Cornwall. If you just simply search in that area, all the public spaces that were being sold off. And what we were continuing to dig into in our investigative way was not just what was being sold off, how much it was being sold off for, who to, and what they were doing with that money. And it was basically a really in-depth look at the loss of public servants, the loss of public spaces, the loss of public services. And this begins to put a picture to local people to understand, and they have the evidence to be able to then go to their councillors and ask the kind of big questions. None of this was available before. The government did not publish this. No one could have that bigger understanding, and also how they fit into the rest of the country. So again, if you see kind of the smaller communities pocketed up on the map, they might have seen or known, or maybe they actually didn't know that none of that had been sold off, but it also formed a larger picture. So this has been a really big part of it. We run, of course, as we launch this story, ahead of time, we get people from around the country to participate, and as the story breaks, it comes out on local papers across the country. So these are just a few of those major headlines. Another big thing that we do is with every investigation, we open up as much as possible the entire process of it. So this is our open resources page that you can see of what we actually make available to people. So as we choose to take on an investigation, we publicly tell people what we're investigating. We invite people to come in and join us, both from our existing network, but by communities of relevance and expertise that we know can jump in on that. We write what's called a reporting recipe, which means that anyone can access that recipe and understand what we're investigating, can join us in that, and it gives you a detailed breakdown on if you want to see your area, here's exactly how you access it. And at the end of the investigation, once the story is public, we publish it on our site, the recipe, the open data, and all the resources you need to know and be equipped as a citizen to use it in whatever way possible. The second thing that we learned in the process was that as we started getting more and more people coming in, that we see journalism as a participatory process going forward. We believe that, as I mentioned earlier, collaboration is not simply about can we get skilled journalists to work together, but actually to truly hold power to account, we need to understand where we sit in the system, and that all players need to be a part of this. So when we first set out, we were doing things that maybe some reporters in the room might know, sort of a classic hack day, which is sort of coders and journalists coming together to solve a problem. And while our traditional kind of hack days might have looked similar to what most people would imagine, technologists and journalists, we started noticing that different people were showing up to these. Again, I think it is our kind of open approach, and we would have just local people, we would have counselors, we would have technologists and different kind of engaged citizens showing up. And as our community began to grow, we realized we needed to really think about this differently. So the Bureau hired the first in our organization called community organizers, a very sort of different title in journalism, but the idea is that this role is set up to actually strategically think about the communities around our journalism. How do we bring them into how we find stories, develop stories, and tell those stories? So again, our hack days started looking very different. We had a mum show up with her kid, and they were sitting there wanting to look at what the cuts to their local services were going to happen. We had a woman show up with her carer to understand how disabled cuts were going to affect her personal community. We hold these in different places around the country, and we sort of see this as a very live act of journalism. The intent was always to first be able to draw in expertise and knowledge and help to really drive the investigation. These always happen before the story comes out, so we're using this to kind of find what's happening on the ground. But what they've also transformed into is a participation process for other people to come in. Here's some more pictures of all these lovely people kind of showing up. And it's been hugely transformational of what that can look like. One of the most powerful things that came out when we first launched one of our first hack days was Theresa May had called a snap election. This was way back before some of the many political happenings of Brexit at the moment, but this was quite a while back, a couple years ago, and when we first launched, and everyone just thought that there was not enough time, not enough data, not enough information to truly dig into what was happening to new voters around the country. So people showed up at our live events in 5 different cities, and they dug in, and our community itself found the story that new voters would be a huge part of the election. And data scientists worked with journalists on those days and built a model to estimate the number of new voters because the government hadn't produced that data publicly. And they were able to run these stories around the country ahead of the election to show how new voters can change it. The next big thing that we learned is obviously understanding the power systems that you exist in. So obviously recognizing where change can happen, but where journalism really needs to step into that space. There was a horrific incident in which a homeless man was sitting on the steps of Parliament and he died. And it raised for the first time this huge profile of homeless deaths. And one of our reporters started trying to find out, how did this happen? How many homeless people are there living in the UK? How many people die? And it turns out that there is no data on how many homeless deaths happen in the UK. So we set up an investigation called Make Them Count. And we began working on a very grassroots level with our members across the country to find that out. Local reporters were telling us about deaths they knew. Local doctors, coroners, people around the country started chipping in, recognizing the power of it. We ran it for 2 winters and have been able to report of 800 people who have died homeless. This is, I think, one of the purest examples of showing how collaboration, how bringing different people from all elements in and understanding where you can really make a difference. And since then, the government have taken our data set and are now producing the first ever statistics on homeless deaths as a result of that powerful work. This is one of the visualizations that we were running online to tell the stories of all of the people who've died. And the very last thing I've just mentioned is that we've also realized that as journalism is changing and how people are accessing is changing, and that distance that was created between local people and how the stories of their lives are affected in the media, we realized that we needed to include people, not just include them in new ways, but to tell stories in new ways. One of the big investigations we did was looking at the cuts to domestic violence refuges around the country. And we had, again, worked with local citizens and we worked with local reporters, and we looked at how funding had been cut for domestic violence refuges and how many women and children were being turned away. But a really important part of that is we met a survivor of domestic violence who wanted to tell her own story. And we decided that instead of that classic power dynamic between us journalists telling their story, a huge part of this has to be about changing the way that we interact with people and tell their stories. So while we did kind of classic journalism reporting around it, we also commissioned her to tell her story in her own way, and she wanted to do a stand-up comedy piece. She's a brilliant writer and wrote a one-woman comedy show about her life in domestic violence refuges, and we took it and toured it around the country. The first half is her show, the second half is a conversation with local reporters and activists to understand what it's really like in their area. And this was hugely transformational in the way that we think about actually how do we tell these stories and how we go forward. So that's just sort of a big kind of overarching picture of what we've learned over the past 2 years. And we've been so excited that in that process, Correctiv reached out to say, how can this model be applied in different pieces to Germany? And one of the next things that we're excited to announce, obviously, David's going to talk about what they've been doing in Germany, but we've been working on a blueprint together that we're going to be publishing next month at Data Harvest, actually, a conference in Brussels. But we'll be publishing this publicly, and if anyone is interested, to please take down those notes, and we want to work and help support people, whether that is you want to take that to your own country, or you want to apply it to a sector, or you want to apply it to a city. We've been approached by so many people who want to build a collaborative process into their work, and so we are here to help support that, and we're really excited by working together to make this blueprint. So I'm going to hand over to David now, and to hear about the incredible work that they're doing at Correctiv.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, as Megan said, we were very intrigued by this approach by Bureau Local to see how this collaboration works in the community sector and local sector. Correctiv itself, we started working in 2014, and from the very beginning we were very focused on local reporting. We do have 2 offices. One is in Berlin. This is something one would expect from an organization like ours. But we always had a second office in the town of Essen, which is like Birmingham in England, or something worse than Detroit in the US. And that way, it was always important to us to understand what is really going on the ground, what people think, what people feel, what is it there. So local reporting is really key to us. And can you switch 2 slides forward? Yeah. And we developed something that was quite similar to the structures Bureau Local has formulated. And we see that what is most important are the ideas one believes in. We need something common, something that we can share when we wanted to start something like a network of local reporters in the whole of Germany. And this was something we understood when we looked at the approach Bureau Local has got. This is, we need to work together with people who believe in transparency, for example, who believe in stories that matter to people, that are not something really fancy stuff, but really stuff that is close to people's hearts. And that's why we were so happy that Augstein Foundation was supporting us to adopt this model to Germany, and through this process of adopting, find a way to give this idea to other organizations everywhere, you know, as you said. It can be replicated everywhere, in every sector, in every town, in every country. What we've seen after this process, that it's kind of difficult. What we see is the core of this whole system. How does it work? First of all, what is our own role in this? We see the role of this network facilitator as the guys who make the first step, who take the risk on the investigation, who go out and see the first documents, who work on the first data sets, who take the risk in an investigation. Only when we see that the investigation itself is successful, or most likely to be successful, we are going to share it with other partners, with journalists, experts. But on the same way, we are exchanging ideas on what kind of story would be the next or should be the next. And I think this exchange is really crucial. Because what we learned, all the whole network is about community management. And this community management is not the community of people in the city, these communities, but it's a community of journalists, of experts, of people who want to contribute to an investigation. So the work that we should do is not the work of a journalist who just writes a story. It's the work of a community manager who gets people together to focus them on one issue, on one idea. And this is quite difficult if it's of co-working with a lot of people. So first of all, you need to understand what people are really interested in and what their motives are. What is their idea? Why do they participate in this process? What is really their driver? When you want to collaborate with journalists, for example, we don't pay any money. So what is their motive to work with us if we don't pay any money? I guess as a journalist you need to live, you make a living. So you need to earn some money with the story we produce. So we should care about a way how the people who contribute to our Correctiv Local can sell stories to their own publisher or to any news outlet, whatever. Next thing is, maybe it's more about saving their jobs or their future. So maybe it's about education as well. So we need to find a way to educate people who are participating in this whole process. Next thing is, yes, it is about their own community. So people care about what is around them. This is something for experts, for example, or for bloggers. But you want them to work together with professional journalists to have professional journalism in the end. As I said, this is community management, and you should think of it very carefully if you want to do something similar. I guess this is also one of the learnings that is in the Bureau Local that is most important to understand that. Next thing is about structured data. I guess it's also very important to understand. It's not about only data analysis. You need to give away the data in a structured way so everybody who is contributing to your local network is able to understand and work with this local data. Then we added some things to this approach. Two things I want just a couple of minutes introduce you to. One is something we call Crowd Newsroom. This is a tool where we can work together with everybody in a city or on an issue on a special investigation. What we did already were a couple of investigations on the question, who owns what, who owns your city? Which is a quite simple question, but difficult to answer. And we started to work on this in the town of Hamburg, and we were able to get around 1,000, a couple of hundred people working on this issue. We did it in Berlin, and working together with around 2,000 people on this investigation. It is possible when you structure your work. This is the Crowd Newsroom, and I guess this will help us to work also in the Correctiv Local. Because through the networking Correctiv Local, we are able to give this idea of crowdsourcing to local reporters, which is very helpful to them and enables them to earn money on this as well when they sell their stories at the end. We understand, while we used the Crowd Newsroom or developed the Crowd Newsroom, some stuff about the issues. What is really important? What kind of stories you can do with these kind of crowdsourcing or collaborating. As I already said, these are issues that are very close to the people, about housing, about schools. This is something everybody's interested in. It's about climate change as well. We are about to start an investigation, collaborative investigation in a couple of weeks on climate change. And this is something everybody knows about Friday for Future demonstrations. This is such a huge issue, and we should address a lot of efforts to it, to work on it on a local level. People are really interested, young people are interested in it. So this is an issue we can work together with a lot of people on in a local level, and nobody's doing it. This is something Correctiv Local is for. The next. Then we understood, as I said, that it's also about education. It's not only about we do a story and it's done. But when you go to the core of education, what is it about? It's not only about training the reporters, it's also about training the citizen to understand your story, to maybe contribute to your story. Maybe they themselves become reporters who work together with you. Therefore, we at Correctiv developed a Reporters Factory, which is an e-learning system which enables a lot of people to participate in online workshops. Sometimes we do these online workshops also as presence workshops in-house. And we started this a couple of weeks ago. And already we have got 5,000 subscriptions to it. It works, these e-learning systems. And combining these e-learning systems together with a collaborative approach in a crowd newsroom and in Correctiv Local brings a lot of people together, and you can focus them on one issue. And you can investigate this issue, make this issue a debate, a public debate on a local level, and when you start to work on it on a local level, you get it to a national level. And this is important, I guess, when you work on something like housing, for example. Yeah, this is already my presentation. The last thing is, as you already mentioned, I guess it's a wonderful idea to bring this concept to as many countries as possible, everywhere, all over Europe and probably all over the world. And this is what we are working for. That's all.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much to both of you. I think it's an amazing example of what I sort of call network journalism, the idea that, you know, that journalists work with other journalists, but also working with the public in all sorts of different ways. And I really like the sort of media literacy bit of it as well, which is exciting. I just want to drop in one other, you know about them, another local organisation that's similarly interesting, which is Bristol Cable. I don't know if you haven't heard about them. They're worth checking out. But let's go to you guys. Have you got any questions to these two journalists? Any questions, or if you've got any examples of work that you're doing, that would be interesting to hear. Please, wait for the microphone and then please ask a question. Thanks.
Hi, is it working? Yeah. My question is, how do you find a local media partner? Where do you publish your local stories? Because, as you said, the core audience of that stories probably doesn't really read trendy online websites, right? So you probably need to find a good local partner. Do you think about it, and how do you engage like that, local newspapers in that, if you do?
It's a good question. So at the moment, obviously, we're using big data sets to sort of analyze an issue at scale, and we'll sort of see sort of peaks in that. So we might see that there's definitely a strong story in Liverpool and Manchester or whatever it is, and then we sort of actively look within our network of people who want to tell that story, or we'll look at an outlet who might have reported on the issue. So we do actually, part of our community organizing element is to try to actually curate who are the best people to tell that story. But your point about, obviously, that there is increasingly, there'll be times when we are in a space that we want to report on it, and there either isn't an outlet there, or they don't have the capacity to take something on like that. And I think one of the next phases of the Bureau Loc that we're looking at is to think about this new medium element of it, which is, where do people actually get their news locally? How do they actually engage and are motivated with that, and to work with those people? And this is where, like I said, it might be working right now with a traditional outlet in a local area, but it could also be partnering with a very influential YouTube vlogger, for instance, who has a youth following and also might care about that issue, but can get it out to people in ways in which they access that information. I think a big part of the Bureau was because it's an infrastructure. We are not doing local stories. We are not experts in those local areas, and what we just try to do is sort of work with people, and we trust those people in those areas to tell it on the platforms that best reach their communities. And it's an area that we're definitely working a lot more in. Because I think, yeah, we have been working with quite a lot of traditional outlets, because those are still the fabric of what exists. But as we know that that's changing, working with multiple partners. And actually in the past couple investigations, we will partner with print and television and radio, for instance, as a kind of, we look at different mediums in that element. And then we're also now starting to look at I think the refuge woman I was talking about, this live storytelling thing, was a very completely different audience and a very different way of reaching people. People who would come to see a comedy show is a little bit different than those who might read 2,000 words on domestic violence for that investigation. So it's a really important point, and I think it's actually one of the things that we're focusing on next is actually how do you reach local people, and it could still be through the existing mediums, but what do the new ones look like? I don't know if you have thoughts on it.
What we did, first we did a kind of survey. We collected from the area we started our local project, like everybody who published something of relevance and regularly. We collected this information, then we made a kind of study. Who are these people? Are they republishing only advertising, or do they their own stuff? Then we invited a lot of these people. These were like bloggers or people who had Facebook groups, and we worked some time with them. We just had we were very careful in selecting them. Next step was we were looking at local newspapers. Who were the people who are really focusing in stories, who were interested in stories? Not the guys who are just publishing some stuff and then heading to the bar to have a couple of beers. We were interested in the people who were really interested into working. Then we invited them to a meeting, and then we started working with them. So it's, from our perspective, it's very important to carefully select the people you are working with. Sometimes we also said, no, you can't join us because it's a waste of time for the both of us.
Why would it be a waste of time? Why would you not work with somebody? What would be the kind of reasons?
When you notice that somebody is not ready to share information, or when somebody does not share these ideas, these common ideas. When somebody is not interested in transparency, for example, or in collaboration, when somebody is just there to get something, but not there to share something, this is then better to say, okay, you've got another approach to this kind of work.
Can I ask, following up on that question, you obviously think very carefully about the organizational partnership element. What's it like as a organization? I don't know how you can quantify this, but is it 5% of your effort, or is it 50% of your effort compared to the actual editorial, work that you're doing?
You mean the community work?
Yeah, the sort of organization, community building,
For us, we already knew that it's a lot of work, but when we started working, we discovered it's more. I guess it's like 60 to 70%. We especially hired people to take care of it. And
so you have to bring in people with specialist skills, if you like, which is not very journalistic, is it? We're not naturally skilled in collaboration and organization.
It's really difficult, when you get some people who have skills in community work, for example, usually these guys are not working with local reporters.
Yeah.
So you need to have a local reporter with a deep understanding what local business is about and work with them into identifying other reporters who are interested on a local level in sharing information. Yeah. This is really a huge task.
Same
well,
thing.
I would say my take is slightly different on that because, well, one is community work is just a huge amount. I'd say probably, again, 70% of that. But what's different is that our community organizers, again, are not administrative. Their job is not to simply sit and research and then contact people. Their job is strategically to think about it. But what a bureau local reporter on my team, it is their job to project manage and work with them. And we've made a very conscious decision. And I guess I should have actually mentioned that a bit earlier is to do a different approach like this, you need a different approach to almost every element of your journalism. Yeah. So both, again, about me as well as an editor and as a director of it, completely kind of breaking down any hierarchical element of managing and thinking very collaboratively both as a team, because we believe that if we do that as a team, we will reflect it in our community. But equally, the reporters' jobs have changed drastically to be a truly collaborative reporter. They know the subject best, so for us, that can't be outsourced to somebody else. And there's no element of Bureau Local that we want to ever outsource anyways. It's sort of the idea that if you were the one driving that investigation, you were also the one driving the collaborations around it. It's something that my team has learned a lot along the way, and that's why community organizing, yes, is a unique skill set, and they help support elements of it. But our reporters sort of both have to think about what is the investigation, what is the evidence around it. They write the reporting recipes that open up to everyone. They help compile, they're all data journalists on my team as well, so they are compiling and opening up that data. They are kind of the leaders and project managers around the community of their investigation. It is actually a huge amount of work that goes around that. And the community organizing is role is a huge support to that. It's to kind of help bridge and support that, but we do not separate those pieces from it. And yeah, that has been probably another huge learning of the local is the element of to do journalism differently means journalists' roles have to change, and the very nature of the newsroom has to look different. And that's been a huge learning curve for all of us as well.
Yeah. Were you saying that euphemistically, that for the journalists? Because again, it's not something, especially investigative journalists, they just want to get and investigate.
Yeah.
They don't want to have to sort of build partnerships and all that kind of stuff.
But I think maybe that might have been a certain hunch. And I think there's a lot of things that we go in with a prejudice, I think, thinking about, that investigative journalists want to work in isolation, or that journalists in general want to work in isolation, or that, when we first set out, no one thought that journalists would work together. That was one big thing.
Yeah.
So we were an experiment. We did not know if we would survive after 2 years because the idea might not work. That was my job 2 years ago, was you were an experiment and your project might end in 2 years because maybe journalists won't work together. Maybe people won't work together. And we were hugely surprised by the idea of this very competitive nature of journalists, and whether it's in times of difficult desperation, but I genuinely do believe that people recognize that. People were really interested in sharing and understanding that. And there is, of course, a self-interest in that. We have reporters in Oxford who were like, I'm happy to share something I did with reporters in Glasgow. One is because that's not a threat to me. It's not competition. And then I can learn something different in a technique that I can use. So there is an element of, if I give, I can also get. But there is also this important recognition that what we're doing together is different. So again, something else I probably should have mentioned earlier is the reason why our investigations are so powerful and are making change is because the difference of running a national story, and you might get a few politicians and a few pressure, but when you start also publishing at the same time local stories, and each local reporter is going to their politicians, it just starts to kind of reverberate the pressure around that and the reach of that investigation. And reporters, we find, really love that. They love being part of something bigger. They know how important their reporting is to their community, and they also get to see how that fits into a wider piece and the kind of change that happens with it as well. So I think a lot of those prejudices around competition and this sort of not wanting to share our work, we've seen have actually broken down, and that people are willing to change and be different in it.
What I think
sorry, I'm going to see, is there another question? Because I realised I've been asking questions, and that's really bad. Sorry, let's take another question. We're running out of time.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the interventions. I am a freelance journalist and a researcher in security, and I worked in the past years in Turkey, and especially with citizen journalist organizations. So I'm specifically interested in the relationship between local investigative journalism and citizen journalism, and I wanted to ask you this: what about, how do you take care of the security of your investigations, of your informations, and especially your people, considering that you work with tens or hundreds of people that cooperate with you? Thank you.
Yeah. Do you want to go first, Dave?
This is pretty simple. In Germany, thanks God, we are still safe. So there's not a really big threat in this kind of investigations we do in these common places. So this is not the biggest threat to us. The biggest threat is libel proceedings, which is sometimes dangerous. This is something we take very serious, and we check before, most of the time, we check before what is going to be published, what is maybe of some danger to libel. Is it right, libel? To libel laws. This is something we take care of. Together with the newsrooms we are publishing with, this is most important. When it comes to the integrity of the investigation itself, usually it's kind of secure communications we do, but mostly this is not really important to us and the environment we are working in. So when you are working on schools in a town in Western Germany, it's not dangerous. You are not going to be killed for it.
Not yet.
I'll just quickly add to that. Yeah, same thing. We obviously do not have the same kind of threats. I guess I would just say though that, but also we haven't done as risky of investigations as we might do in the future. So my position on this and my thinking on this might change. But at the moment, we're looking very much at sort of public data, public access information. So the worst that's come to that is when there is a quite legally sensitive story, our reporting recipes become this sort of Bible around that, and we put a lot of clauses around, be careful when reporting this, make sure you're doing that. We work very closely with them when it's a legally sensitive story, and this is more to help protect our collaborators when around any legal risks that they might have. And that's the kind of riskiest that it's gotten at the moment. We've done stories, though, where local politicians have gone after some of our reporters on Twitter, or kind of more on a sort of verbal sort of attack or discrediting them. But what's nice about having a network is people then stand behind, so we will do a public kind of stance of protection and standing with that reporter, and loads of our network will join in on that as well. So there's kind of an element of camaraderie with that that's really nice about having a collaborative network. But again, we do not have the level of risk or danger that's associated with that. But I would probably look, you could look to ICHA and you could look to some more secure systems, I think, for that. Because I think at the moment we use pretty open software for our collaborations. We use things like Slack and things like that. So I think you would just have to make it a bit more secure from that point of view, and be very careful around how you do that. But again, we're lucky to not have that situation.
We're just about run out of time. We need to sort of finish so the next lot can get in and set up. But make sure if you've got any other questions, please follow up with these two. Correctiv are fantastic, and Bureau Local is absolutely my favourite journalistic project of the last few years. I think it's phenomenal, and it was an experiment, but it's been extremely effective. Impact for pound sterling has been extraordinary, but impact in the sense of a wonderful exemplar to show what you can do with journalism, even in these incredibly difficult financial times. It's actually been outstanding, and Megan and the team have done a fantastic job. So thanks for your questions, but thanks very much for those presentations, you two.
Thank you. Thank you.